It's me again, here to talk to you about the cardiovascular adjustments to changing positions. If you were to change from a seated to a standing position or supine to standing position, you might have occasionally experienced a drop in blood pressure and felt a little bit lightheaded. We call that orthostatic hypotension, and it's one of the topics of this week's lab. And I wanted to go over the sequence of events that results in the drop of pressure, and then secondarily, how does our cardiovascular control center in the medulla respond to that? So let's start by reminding you that your body is a fluid column. So if you're lying down, your whole body's at the level of your heart, and so it's very easy to return blood from the feet to the heart and from the heart to the brain. So your mean arterial pressure doesn't need to be that high. Then if you were to stand up, now our heart is below the level of our head, and now it's harder to return to move blood from the heart up to the top of the head. And so our pressure initially drops before coming up. Okay? So I want to divide our flow chart into two parts. First, what is causing this initial drop? And then secondarily, how do we bring it back up? Okay? So when you go from supine to standing, blood pools in the legs. Gravity pulls blood down, blood goes to the legs. What do you suppose then happens to venous return? Well, that decreases venous return. And if venous return decreases, what would that do to end diastolic volume? That would decrease end diastolic volume. And if end diastolic volume decreases, what would that do to stroke volume? And if stroke volume decreases, what happens to cardiac output? And if cardiac output decreases, what would happen to pressure? So that's why blood pressure initially goes down, and that's why if you felt lightheaded when you've moved positions from supine to standing or seated to standing, why you've felt lightheaded. When your blood pressure drops, blood flow to your brain decreases and you feel lightheaded. A point about learning flow charts. If you set about it by trying to memorize, it's very easy to mix up the order, and on an exam that doesn't help you. You lose points. So it's really important that you try and understand the relationship between any two of these variables. And if you're struggling with that, I want you to ask us so we can help you with that. So blood pressure drops. What is going to detect the drop in blood pressure? Our baroreceptors, right? And what we're going to be doing now is something we did earlier this semester, and that is talking about a reflex arc. Here is our receptor. It's going to send information via afferent nerve. I'm not actually going to ask you to know these, but from the carotids and the aortic, baroreceptors, it's via an afferent branch of the vagus nerve, and from the carotids, it's the glossopharyngeal nerve. But the baroreceptors are going to send information to our cardiovascular control centers, and where are those located? It's right in our medulla, in our brainstem. So medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. And now, what's the medulla going to do? What branch of the autonomic nervous system would it use to rapidly increase blood pressure if blood pressure were low? Well, it would activate sympathetic nerves. And what would be our effector organs? Well, they would be the heart and our blood vessels. So one thing that could happen is we would increase heart rate, and that would increase cardiac output. And if cardiac cardiac output increases, what would happen to pressure? Right? And what else could the sympathetic nervous system do? Well, it could cause vasoconstriction, especially of our arterioles, and that would increase TPR, and that would also increase pressure. So these arrows represent sympathetic nerves, an increase in sympathetic nervous system activity. So that is how we bring our blood pressure back up and make it so that we can now deliver blood from our heart to our brain and from our feet up to our heart.